And that's one of the things I like to do is encourage other people to do this kind of work, because this is why. If we had more people working to solve problems than we do people creating problems, we could turn this earth into a paradise. Do you realize, for the most part of you out here, and I can say this, I believe, to the vast majority of your listeners, do you realize that if the world did business the way you do and treated people the way you do, you would already be living in a paradise? Why? Well, because most of you don't steal. Most of you don't abuse other people or abuse kids. You wouldn't have to lock your doors. Main function of police would be directing traffic at the county fair. If we can raise the consciousness of people high enough, then you've got people solving problems rather than creating problems. Well, the first principle is that all things, literally everything, is composed of energy, and the intelligent human mind can direct energy. The second principle is energy is impressed upon matter. That means that we are affected by everywhere we've been, people we have associated with, and any events in our life. And the third one I borrowed from Einstein, energy follows thought. And everything else that we do are really based on those principles. Distance is really not a factor in this.
You could go anywhere on this planet.
Well, as far as I know, yes. As a matter of fact, yesterday I was working on a family in Hong Kong. But I've got another story for you that I'm really, this is the most exciting one that I've ever had. And this occurred last April. A friend of mine, a farmer, dairy farmer, lives about 100 miles away. And he wrote, he didn't write. He called me one night. He said, I have a problem. He said, I had some weeds in my alfalfa field, and it was about 20 acres of alfalfa. And he called the local farm supply to come out and spray for weeds. Well, what happened, the guy doing the spraying picked up the wrong jug of chemicals and sprayed the entire field with Roundup. He said there was not a living alfalfa plant to be found. Well, only thing is, I didn't know that until 3 months after the fact. All he told me was it's been sprayed with Roundup.
Right.
And I said, well, how long is it going to take to overcome this? He said, about a year. He said, I've got to plow it all up, reseed it, start all over. Well, that's a big loss to a dairy farmer. And I said, well, let me see what I can do. Don't plow it up yet. I have pictures, and these pictures on my archive newsletters on my website. 30 days later, when they cut hay, he said it was one of the best alfalfa crops he'd ever had. It was about 4 feet tall or taller. He has this year gotten 5 cuttings. Now, that's 5 cuttings is quite a bit for 1 year in this part of the country. But he got 5 cuttings of alfalfa off of it. Now, what did I do? Well, if everything is energy and the intelligent human mind can direct energy, all I really did, and this is a terminology that I use, I kind of borrowed it from computer language or TV language. I scrambled the frequency of the Roundup and transformed it into fertilizer.
That's amazing.
Well, George, everything is energy. You can take, I'll give you another story. I've got a good friend who lost her husband 3 or 4 years ago, and she waited several months before she ever called me. And she said, I really wanted to call you sooner, but I knew I would start crying as soon as I started talking about him. And she started crying right then. Well, I like these people, and I like to do as much good as I can for folks. And I said, what your problem is, you have the spirit of grief. Well, all that is a form of energy. Love is energy. Hate is energy. Jealousy is energy. And so is grief. All I did was said I'd like to turn the energy of grief and turn it into happiness. So help me, George, within a minute she was laughing about it.
Within a minute?
Yes.
How did you turn it around so fast?
Well, it's all intent. Now, of course, I'm a dowser, and I use a 45 caliber bullet on a chain for a pendulum, and all that's for is just to tell you how long to focus on something. If you meditate on something, how do you know when to quit?
That's
right.
I
don't. If I'm using a physical object, which I use my pendulum, and the length of time and the velocity at which it spins will tell you how much energy is required to correct the problem. And I just let it spin until it stops. and it spun for probably 30 seconds maybe, and then she started laughing. Well, she called me back about an hour later, and she says, I can think about him now, but I don't cry. And this woman had become a recluse after her husband died, and because they were so close together. And these were good friends. They lived a few states away, but I would see them maybe once, twice a year. Well, by golly, let's see, we did that probably in January, maybe. In June, she drives all the way to Vermont in the motorhome and runs a sales table for them at the Dowsing convention up there.
And she's all upbeat and everything else.
Yes, just like she always was. But this woman had become a recluse from September until January when I talked to her.
What made you think of doing that, of turning around the grief energy?
Well, actually, George, I think all it is required is a desire to do something. My old buddy Jose Silva, the founder of Silva Mind Control, he said it is our desire to help people that gives us the knowledge to do it. You see, all this knowledge is available if we can just mentally tap into it. And the more time we spend in what I call, scientifically stated, is alpha brain frequency. Some people call it prayer. Some people call it meditation. It's all saying the same thing. And our desire to help people, in my opinion, is what allows us to tap into the information to do it. Now, that's not saying I have the answer to everybody's problems. Far from it. But I do believe that's the major key to it.
Can people clear their own negative energies away from themselves, or do they need that?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I do. Because I am not immune to things, George.
You're a human being, right?
Yeah.
I think.
Well, probably. So there are a number of what I call energetic factors that affects the human race. Not only humans, it affects animals. I think it affects plants. And we can change. I want to say we can change all of it. I could be wrong on that, but I do know just from experience that we can change a lot of it. Now, when I say I know this, the only thing I have to go on is, do we get physical results from the work we do? And if we do, then I have to assume it works.
That's the test.
That's really all that matters. Like the night you and I did the test, when you asked if I could change water for people across America, I didn't know if I could, but neither did I know that I couldn't.
Does this make you healthier? Can you feel yourself change?
Well, I believe it does because I'm older and dirt and tougher than nails. So I would have to say yes. As far as health goes, George, I don't mind sharing my viewpoints on it. They're probably contradictory to society, but most everything else I do is too. I think it's all a state of mind. And we live in a world that people are bombarded with negativity, and I refuse to buy into it.
Good for you. I get the picture of you, and I'm trying to picture you. I see you walking around with a branch looking for water. It's more than that, isn't it?
Oh, it's a heck of a lot more than that. I've never used a tree branch to find anything. I use a bullet on a chain to find it. All dowsing is, George, it's a tool. That's all it is. It's a tool to help humans tap into their intuition. There's no ritual. All people may come up with rituals and formulas and all that, but, the only reason that people need ceremonies and rituals is to help them focus their mind.
That's all.
If you can focus your mind, you don't need the ceremony. The real key is intent. But like I say, it's a tool. Most people do not believe in themselves, and if they do something, they'll say, "Oh, I just made that up." But if they're holding an object, whether it's a nut on a string or a diamond ring on a thread or whatever it is, and it moves without them putting a muscular effort into it, they say, "Wow, look at that." What it does, it enhances the belief system of the human mind.
So with this pendulum, you kind of hold it with your fingertips, right?
Right.
And you just do what with it?
Oh, well, I just, when I pick it up, it automatically starts in a movement that swings toward me and away from me. And then I use a chart, a numeric chart, registering 0 to 100% plus or minus.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, anything that is good for me will be on the right hand of the positive side of the chart. Anything that is not is on the left, and the chart is available free on one of my websites. If anyone wants to get it, make a copy of it, feel free to help yourself. And you will do better if you ask questions that can be answered with a numeric value rather than a yes or no. For example, if you ask, is a soft drink good for you, you'll probably get a no. If you ask, is rat poison good for you, you'll get a no, but it won't tell you the difference. If you would ask a question in this manner, what is the result of this upon my body, you will get a numeric value that will tell you it's either a little bit good or bad or a whole lot.
Now, see, that's fascinating. I've always used the yes-no technique, so this is even better.
Oh, it's much better. Yeah, yes and no is nothing really wrong with it except it's insufficient.
That's right. It doesn't give you everything. It's a great lie detector.
Oh, you better believe, because if you go, anytime somebody wants your money, whether you're going to trade cars or buy a dishwasher or whatever it is, I just put out my bullet and check to see what is the level of truth that you're telling me about this.
Do you
if they want to know what I'm doing, I'll say I'm checking to see if you're telling me the truth.
Now, do you do it, or do you make them do it?
Oh, I do it. I wouldn't. They wouldn't know what they were doing.
Okay, so some people would say there's some kind of reflex action that does that.
That very well may be true, because every part of our body has its own intelligence and emotion. Now, I can elaborate on that if you want me to.
Yeah, please.
All right. I have an old Indian hero, old Apache man who was born back in the mid-1870s, and he had a phrase that went something like this. Now, I never met this person. I just know about him. And he had a phrase that went something like this. He called it the energy that moves in all things. Well, a few years ago, one of my friends was telling me about a new scientific discovery that every atom within the space between the protons and electrons, this space contained energy. And I'm thinking, well, by golly, that's what that old Indian knew. Science finally caught up with him. So I took that one piece of information and I pulled out my bullet pendulum and I started asking questions. I said, does my dowsing system, that's usually the way I refer it. Sometimes I've talked to what I call the spirit world, but it's probably one and the same.
And you put the chart down, the little number chart? Is that down? Do you need that?
Well, I didn't even have a chart then. I just pulled a pendulum out and I said, does my dowsing system understand the energy within atoms? And said, yes. I said, does this energy have intelligence? Yes. Does this intelligent energy respond to human thought? Yes. Well, everything that exists is composed of atoms. Therefore, this intelligent energy in each atom would be in everything that exists. If it isn't everything, it is of necessity everywhere. If it's everywhere, there's nowhere that it isn't. And if we have Bible scholars out there, that's the definition of God. Now, since this atoms make up cells, cells make tissue, tissue makes body parts, and all together form a human body. So I've just taken this simple illustration here and found that each body part has its own intelligence and its own emotion. So one of the things I do if I have a request to help a person with an illness, I check to see how much love is in their cells of their body. I check to see how happy the cells are.
And you can tell by that?
Oh, of course.
Let's talk a little bit about intent, Raymond. How strong is intent in order to change things, whether it's water or anything?
That's a good question, because I get asked, can anybody do this? Well, I would like to say yes, but not everybody has that strong intent. And what makes intent? Well, I believe that it is functioning with both our right and left brain hemisphere, because visualization, in my opinion, plays a big part in this. And in order to visualize, we must of necessity use the right side of our brain. So I think that's got a lot to do with it. Another thing is functioning at a low brain frequency, because that's where the power of thought lies, is in what is known as an alpha frequency or perhaps even a theta frequency. But let's just say for the sake of discussion, an alpha frequency, which is around 10 cycles of brain frequency per second. Now, what is interesting, the research that's been done with dowsers shows that dowsers simultaneously function in all brain frequency, alpha, beta, theta, and delta. And this is probably why I can talk to somebody on the phone in a beta brain frequency, but yet pick up information that usually requires an alpha brain frequency to pick up. Now, that's what I think. And the more that we function in a low brain frequency, and again, you can call it prayer or meditation, the more powerful our mind becomes.
If that's the case, can somebody use intent to change the mind of somebody else?
Yes, to a degree.
I mean, here's an example. If you were around during World War II, could you have changed Hitler's mind?
I'm going to have to say probably not, but then again, I don't know, because every person has free will. And I have worked at improving an awful lot of people, but I think they had to have a desire to be improved. And if a person doesn't want to improve, they probably won't. However, I do believe I have a good record of stopping serial rapists and serial killers, whether they like it or not. But that's the way I change their mind. I simply take the negative indies away from them, or in another word, I depossess them, because that's where they probably got the power to start with. And there's different ways of changing people's minds. We have done, I remember this one fellow that had acrophobia, fear of heights, and he was just really terribly afraid of heights. And within 3 hours, he was out looking over the edge of a cliff without any fear. What did I do? I removed 18 archetypes of acrophobia.
Now, how do you know, though, how to handle every specific different episode?
I don't know how to handle every one, but I'll answer your question the best I can. I don't always have all the answers. I never like to give that impression because some things I just simply don't know how to do. But I have what I call conversations with the spirit world, and I said, look, I'm down here on planet Earth, third rock from the sun, and I'm limited to something we call time, and you folks in the spirit world don't have this problem. So if you want me to get anything done down here, I've got to put a program in place in my mind that I can tune in real quick to whatever it takes to solve the problem. That's what I call programming our brain. I was listening to a video by Greg Braden the other day. He was making a talk somewhere in Italy, I believe, and Greg said something like this. I will quote him as accurately as I can. Whenever you build up this feeling of intent in your heart, he kept talking about heart energy, he says you affect people for miles around you. Personally, I think you can affect anybody in the world. And I think that's all it is. It's a belief. The human mind is capable of so much more than we have ever believed it was. And I really think I've only scratched the surface of it. So if it still comes down to the one word, intent.
Well,
now,
I think intent is critical.
The more we work it, just like exercise or anything else, the more you do something, the better you get at it.
How many people are practicing this worldwide?
Oh, I don't have any idea. I mean, it's a fair question, but I don't know. I don't think there's that many, comparatively speaking to the population, that are doing work on a real intense level. I do this work every day and sometimes all day. I mean, I still have wood to cut and chores to do and all these kind of things, but I spend a lot of time doing this, and I probably became a fanatic at it. But it's on any, whether it's a sport or activity or playing music or whatever, just the more you do it, the better you get.
It works. The more you do it, the better you get. Whether you have Someone teaching you or not? It's just pure training, isn't it?
Most of the time, I've had to teach myself. See, when in this work, there are no reference books I can go to. I mean, how would I have learned how can I change water? Actually, you were the one that is responsible for that, George. If you hadn't asked me to do it, I wouldn't have known it could be done. But since you asked,
remember that. It was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was 9 years ago.
Yeah, it sure was.
So I've had to teach myself on most of it. But here again, there is what I call universal energy. Now, some may call it the Great Spirit, some may call it God, some may call it higher intelligence. I don't want to split hairs with anybody on this. I just call it universal intelligence. And if we're able to tap into that, we have the ability to get information. And I didn't corner the market on it. Other people do it. And that's one of the things I like to do is encourage other people to do this kind of work, because this is why. If we had more people working to solve problems than we do people creating problems, we could turn this earth into a paradise. There is a book called Power versus Force written by David Hawkins, and in it is a scale of level of human consciousness. Now, I'm not going to try to explain that very well because I'm not even sure I fully understand it, but I still use it. And if we can raise the consciousness of people high enough, then you've got people solving problems rather than creating problems. Unfortunately, his book came out in 95, and he said at that time 85% of the population of the earth was below a 200 level of consciousness, which is extremely low. And I've given thought to this, and I asked the folks in my classes, has it ever occurred to you what would happen if you lived in a world of, let's say, 750 level of consciousness? I said, you wouldn't have any wars. Nobody would start them. You wouldn't have crime. And I say a lot of things like this, and I said, I want to make you people feel good about yourself. And I say this to every audience to which I speak. I said, do you realize, for the most part of you out here, and I can say this, I believe, to the vast majority of your listeners, do you realize that if the world did business the way you do and treated people the way you do, you would already be living in a paradise? Why? Well, because most of you don't steal. Most of you don't abuse other people or abuse kids. You wouldn't have to lock your doors. Main function of police would be directing traffic at the county fair. I was in a talk with someone here last summer, and a man was standing there, and he said, I can't imagine a world like that. I said, sure you can. It's not any different than the way you and I treat one another. It's that simple.
It still baffles me, though, how the power of intent is able to change things so dramatically.
Well, it's simply a form of energy. It's about the only way I know to explain it. See, even though it is unseen and it may be unmeasurable as far as I know, I'm not real sure, but thoughts are simply a form of energy. And to sum it up, thoughts are things.
All right, I want you to do a quick water experiment for us.
Sure. Before
the top of the break. What do people need to do?
Well, all you do is get you a glass of water and take a sip out of it, see how it tastes, set it down by the radio, and you folks out there listening tonight, now you're going to be part of this. You have the intent that the energy I'm going to be sending that water will go in it. Because if you sit there saying this ain't going to work, you may be right on the glass of water you have, but you're not going to affect it from stopping somebody else if they want it to happen.
But if you're negative about it, it might not work.
It might not, because negativity definitely is a force. That's why I will refuse to do any work on anybody if they're saying this isn't going to work. I say, you're right, you're going to have to keep your problems.
You've taken chlorine out of water, haven't you?
Well, the people that were drinking it said I did.
Well, that's the testimony. It works.
What happened, George, I remember this occurred out in Missouri, and there was a whole group of us out to dinner one night, and there was a veterinarian sitting across the table from me, and I watched him take a sip of his water. So without saying anything to him, I just slipped my pendulum out down under the table and took the chlorine out. And in a few minutes, I said, do you mind taking another sip of your water and tell me how it tastes? And he took a sip, and he had a real funny look on his face. He said, "What have you done to it? I can't taste the chlorine." But this is being done on a pretty large scale now. I don't know when you want to fit this in the show, but I've got some pretty good story to tell on this, if true, and I believe it's true, about how water has changed a lot in about the last 8 months.
Tell me, and then you have reasons why this is happening?
Well, I believe I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I have been measuring the energy of rain since about 97. And on the scale I use, and I don't know that it's a scientific scale, but it works for me. And the figure I got on measuring rain was about 2,000 on my scale. Well, about the 29th of February this past year, one of my friend Krista down in Austin sent an email saying, "Will you check the energy of the Gulf?" Because the energy of the Gulf water had dropped dramatically since that oil spill, and I hadn't been able to do anything with it. So when I checked the energy of the Gulf, it was so much higher. I mean, it had dropped down to, I think, about 800 on my scale. And when I checked, it was about 17,000. I think, wait a minute, there's no way. About 2 days later, I get another email, "Would you check the energy of the Gulf again?" It's up about 26,000. Well, remember I told you about my buddy Jeff Jones, who's lived 15 years without a meal. He lives on a gallon of water a day because he puts his vitamins and minerals in it. So he calls me one night, just about mid-March, and he said, "Have you checked the energy of rain lately?" And I said, "Well, didn't have any reason to. It's been the same for the last 15 years. He said, "I think you better check it." He said, "I checked it today for about 30,000. Well, by golly, the next day it rained here, and I checked it at 31. And, George, it has gone up. Now, the first logical explanation is I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, yeah, but we know you do.
Well, not only that, I've got some what I think fairly intelligent people that are getting very similar readings on it. But the energy of rain and snow now is over 100,000. Well, I got to thinking about this. I think, if we can use as a definition for energy, and this is a definition I use, the amount of good that can be done, then why don't we put this stuff to work? Now, water has a spirit, as I've talked to before on the show here, but not all water has the spirit of water in it. And we knew that city water did not have the spirit of water. Why? Because it had the spirit of greed. And we found out that the spirit of water would not stay where the spirit of greed is. Now, as far as I know, all elements have a spirit, and this is kind of Native American philosophy. But anyway, what I did, when I energize water for a group of people in my class, I always give them a bottle of water to take home with them.
And they put little drops in,
yeah.
Right? Okay.
And what I do, I put a thought form in it. And the thought form is nothing more than an intent. And the intent is that this water is immune to any forces that would take away from its life force and its purpose. So I got to thinking, now that we've got this much energy out here in the water and in the rain, why don't we put a thought form in the rain and in the streams and all this? And the same thought form, that it would be immune to any forces that would deplete its life force, because the processing of the water and the adding of the chemicals and so on in the water plants was what was taking it away. Well, in August of this year, I had people in class from 5 countries, U.S., Australia, France, Italy, and Canada. And I said, I want you folks to go back in time until the 1st of January and check the energy of your public water supply back home. And I didn't tell them why. I always do my best to ask questions in a non-leading manner.
Right. And
they checked it out, and it wasn't very good. I said, okay, thank you. Now, would you mind to check it today and see what it is? And it was tremendously higher. I have done this experiment by phone with dowsers all across America. I say, you pick any body of water out there you want, whether it's a farm pond or a stream or whatever. You check the energy last year, you check the energy now, and tell me what you find. And invariably, the energy of the water has risen tremendously. So I also found in every restaurant that I have been in, the first thing I do when they set a glass of water on the table is I check the energy of it. Everywhere I've been, the energy has increased. What that tells me is that we had the ability to put a thought form in the water out there in the world, and the reason I chose the one I did was so nobody else could mess it up. Now, I will have to say this. I don't believe it affected all the water in the world because I tested the Ganges back in October, and it was really a mess. And I was supposed to have feedback from someone over in India on that, but
Nothing
they haven't
happened.
got back with me because I can't say much on it. But the bottom line is this. The energy of water in the last 10 months, ever since maybe almost 11 months now, has increased probably more than it ever has in time. I think it was the intent of my friend Krista down in Texas and teaming up on this, and I had a few more friends work with me on this kind of stuff. I think that is what did it. Now, I don't want to sound boastful here on this. Maybe there was 1,000 other people doing it that I don't know about. Maybe somebody else did it besides us. But that's when we noticed the turning point, though. What I am hoping that we have done, and I cannot prove this, not yet anyway, but what I'm hoping we've done is made water immune to anything that would make it less than what it's supposed to be.